"You thief! How dare you steal from me?" The billionaire's voice thundered through the mansion, echoing against the polished marble walls. The staff froze, their eyes wide with horror. At the center of the storm stood Maria, the maid who had served him faithfully for years. Her body trembled, her eyes wet with tears, but she didn't flinch. She clasped her hands together and whispered, "I did it. Not for greed, not for myself, but for my son. He's dying. I had no choice." For years, Maria had been invisible inside the grand estate. She rose before dawn, scrubbing floors that would never remember her touch, polishing silver that she could never afford to hold, and preparing feasts she would never taste. The world saw her as nothing more than a shadow in uniform. But behind that weary face was a mother carrying a pain few could imagine. Her little boy, just 10 years old, was fading away. His body was weak, his breathing shallow, and the doctors said that without surgery and impossibly expensive surgery, he would not survive. Every night Maria sat by his bed, listening to the fragile rhythm of his breath, her heart breaking. With every cough, every whispered plea of "Mommy, will I be okay?" she worked double shifts, begged for loans, and pawned the last treasure she owned. But it was never enough. Desperation became her only companion. And then, one late evening, as she dusted the billionaire's study, her eyes landed on something she wished she had never seen. A briefcase stacked with cash. Her chest tightened, her palms grew damp, and in that moment, time seemed to stop. That money represented life itself, not hers, but her son's. Her heart pounded so loudly she feared it would betray her. She told herself she was not stealing for selfishness, but for love, for survival, for a chance to hold her child again without the shadow of death hanging over them. And with trembling hands, she took it. But the mansion was not a place where secrets could hide. The billionaire's world was built on cameras, guards, and control. The very next morning, she was dragged before him, surrounded by eyes that burned. With judgment, he demanded answers, his voice sharp as a blade. Maria fell to her knees, the truth spilling from her lips like a flood she could no longer contain. She told him everything: her son's sickness, her endless prayers, her hopeless nights, the terror of knowing that time was running out. She confessed without excuse, ready to accept punishment, ready to lose everything, if only her boy could live. The room was silent. The air was thick with tension. Every servant expected rage, police, prison. But the billionaire stood there, his expression unreadable, his silence heavier than any words. And then, to everyone's shock, his voice softened. "I, too, once stole," he said quietly, his eyes distant, as if staring into a memory that still haunted him. "I stole too. Saved my mother. And for years I was judged, just as you are now." The weight of his words stunned the room. Maria's tears fell harder, but this time they weren't from fear, they were from the faint glimmer of hope in his voice. Instead of calling the police, instead of destroying her, the billionaire did something no one could have predicted. He not only forgave her, he gave her more. He arranged the surgery himself, paying every cost. He wired more money into her account than she had ever seen in her life, enough to secure a future for her son. And beyond that, he established a foundation in her boy's name, dedicated to helping children whose families could not afford to fight for them. Months later, Maria held her son in her arms as he laughed for the first time in years, healthy and whole. She kissed his forehead, unable to stop her tears, and whispered, "You're alive, my love. You're alive." She would never forget the man she once feared, the man who could have crushed her, but instead chose to lift her up. Billionaire never sought recognition, never demanded repayment. All he left her with was one simple truth: the greatest treasure is not in keeping wealth, but in giving life. Maria had stolen from him, but what he gave her in return was priceless. And that is why this story will forever remind us that mercy, when it is least expected, is worth more than gold.